Hey guys, my name's Andrew. Trevor is my good friend behind the camera. He's gonna edit everything together, make this look like we know what we're doing here. Today we're gonna be reviewing my 2020 Alfa Romeo Giulia. Alright guys, so this is my 2020 Alfa Romeo Giulia. This is the base, that denotes the trim. I've owned this car for about a year now. There's some things I really like about it. There's some things I really don't like about it. So this being a base, it's relatively low option, but it does have some standard features that I think most people are gonna like. As far as options this car has, this has the Lunare white metallic, which you can kind of see here. It looks more silver or platinum. It does kind of change colors depending on the lighting. Sometimes it looks blue, sometimes it looks a little orange. You get hints of purple in there too. I think it looks pretty great, especially with the Nero Edizione package. That's another option this car has. That's going to give you some of the blacked out, the V there, the Scudetto is what Alfa Romeo calls it. You're going to get the dark gray mirror caps, the wheels, some other black trim, rear emblems, things like that. This car also has the cold weather package, which is going to give you heated seats, heated steering wheel, and heated washer nozzles. So the dark gray here, it almost looks black. It's like a really, really dark metallic black, gray. It's really, really dark metallic gray, but for the most part, it looks black. The wheels do match. This car does have the optional staggered wheel package, which I believe was about 600 bucks. It's going to give you a 9-inch wheel in the back and an 8-inch wheel up front, 255 in the rear for a tire size, and 235 in the front. You also have your blacked out calipers with the Alfa Romeo script on them. I think it looks pretty good. Personally, if I was going to option this car, I probably would have done yellow calipers because just give it a little extra flair. Tires, this would have come from the factory with a Bridgestone run flat. The Alfa Romeos come with those instead of a spare. They have run flats on them from the factory. Highly recommend you get rid of those. They're absolutely terrible. Not just the Bridgestones in particular, just all run flats are awful. The car will ride like trash. I upgraded to the Continental Extreme Contacts, DWS 06 Plus. Really happy with them, super grippy for an all season. Really, really compliant, and I think they look pretty good too. This is the all-wheel drive version. So the Q4 kind of denotes the all-wheel drive. Up here in New England, you're really not going to see too many rear-wheel drive Giulias. I don't think I've seen a single base Giulia with rear-wheel drive. Obviously, the Quadrifolios are all rear-wheel drive, but again, the 2 liters are pretty much going to be all-wheel drive up here. You go into warmer climates, you're going to see pretty much exclusively rear-wheel drive. The all-wheel drive sits about an inch or so higher. I think it's like 3/4 of an inch actually. It is noticeable. It does sit a little high from the factory, I think. I think the rear-wheel drive being just that little bit lower kind of looks perfect as far as ride height goes. All right, guys, so let's talk about the interior. First thing I've noticed after owning this car for about a year, if you're a thick boy like I am, getting in and out of this car is not super fun. You kind of have to like tuck your head at the exact same time as you're sitting down, and if you don't, you're going to bash your face right off of the top of the sill here. Once you're inside, it's pretty cozy in here. If you're used to a bigger car, this is gonna feel pretty snug. Driving position's really good though. I have to have my seat a little bit closer than I probably prefer, and I also have to have the steering wheel a little bit higher than I would prefer. And that's just to help me get in and out of the car. I'd like my steering wheel a little bit lower, but just getting in and out is really difficult if the steering wheel is where I'd like it to be. So unfortunately, that's kind of a trade-off you have to make. Once you're inside, it's pretty comfy, no real issues. This car does have the base seats, which don't necessarily look that good, and they don't really have a lot of bolstering either, especially thigh bolstering. So you do slide around a little bit in the corners. Most cars obviously are going towards the full digital dash. I think that can look really good depending on the execution. I really like the combination of the physical analog gauges and the small, I believe it's a 7-inch display measured diagonally. FCA has been using that 7-inch center screen for probably 10 years in just about every car they make. Screen's decent, it's not amazing, kind of what you'd expect from FCA. Looking at the steering wheel super comfortable. The girth, it's right on point. Not too thick, not too thin. You know what I'm talking about out there? You have your start button right here, kind of like race car inspired. It's just kind of convenient to have it there. When you first start driving this car, it takes a while to remember that it's on the steering wheel though. Volume controls here, really convenient if you're doing your race car mode here with your hands on the steering wheel in the proper positions. And then you can change your channels here for your radio. So the infotainment system, it's definitely not why you'd buy this car. It's definitely not the latest and greatest. The screen's kind of small. It's not super responsive. It does look pretty decent, but definitely not my favorite system to use. As far as the touch controls, relatively responsive, kind of slow sometimes. Sometimes you have to press them a couple times or you have to get the pressure just right. It works fine. It's definitely not gonna blow your socks off. And like I said, not the greatest. The competitors, the Audi A4, the BMW 3 Series, Mercedes C300, much farther ahead in terms of technology. You do have use of your rotary dial. Rotary dial is what this car originally came with up until 2020 when they made the touchscreen the standard. It works pretty well. I actually probably use the rotary dial more than anything because it's a lot more responsive. You're also gonna have, I believe Audis have these too. They have the volume control and track control, seat, things like that right here. I really like that. When you put your hand down, it just kind of falls there and you can change your channel, turn your volume up and down, things like that, mute it. So Alfa Romeo wanted to make sure that your modes were very easily accessible. You can change them on the fly whenever you like, which I do pretty often. Obviously, you're gonna start out in natural, which is what it's in right now. You have your advanced efficiency, which it's not enjoyable to drive in advanced efficiency. Really sluggish, shifts way too early. It's just not enjoyable at all. So most of the time driving natural or dynamic. Dynamic's great, obviously gonna hold the gears longer, things like that. Sharpens up the throttle response, tightens up steering. Definitely a lot more fun to drive in that and really changes the character. Pretty standard to have different modes in most cars these days, so it's nothing groundbreaking, but I really do like that you have your 3 modes here, easily accessible, and you don't have to go through a menu or anything like that to get to them. Now, obviously, looks are subjective. That being said, I don't think there's too many people that are gonna argue and say that this isn't a good looking car. I think it looks excellent, especially with the Lunare white. You get a lot of looks in this car. It kind of grabs your attention. I think part of that is because most people don't know what this is. A lot of people are sitting there scratching their heads saying, what is that? You know, things like that. I had somebody ask me if it was an Acura the other day because they saw the A. It doesn't look like an Acura. Nope, not at all. But it is a beautiful car. I think it's held up pretty well over the years. I think this is for 22, that would be the 6th model year for this car. But it still looks pretty modern and current. It doesn't really look dated. It's aggressive, but classy at the same time. And it really does get your attention. Like I said, my previous vehicle was a plum crazy purple Charger Daytona. I feel like I almost get maybe a little bit more attention in this car because people just really don't see them too often. Obviously, it depends on where you are. Around here, you don't see them. That being said, that exclusivity has its drawbacks. For me, I have to drive an hour either way to the dealership. I have to drive to either Boston, Massachusetts or Portland, Maine for service. It's kind of a pain. You basically have to make a whole day out of it, so that's something to keep in mind. All right, guys, so we're driving the Alfa Romeo Giulia. Let's talk about why you'd consider this car over the competitors. I've driven the BMW 3 Series, various forms of those, Audi A4, C300. Those cars are all great, but it really depends on what you value. If you value fun to drive, this car, it's a no-brainer, and that's why you would choose one of these. There's a lot of sacrifices you're gonna make with this car over the others, over the competition, but to me, the drivability of this car, it's totally worth it. It has this character to it, and it just feels special every time you drive it. The steering feel is unbelievable. It's probably the best I've ever felt in any car in this class, and even more expensive cars. A lot of sports cars I've driven don't even have the steering feel like this does. Super sharp, it's super direct. You know exactly where the front tires are at all times. It kind of has, especially around town, at lower speeds, around, you know, intersections and taking sharp turns and things like that. It really has kind of like a go-kart feel to it, and it feels a lot lighter than its curb weight suggests. Powertrain wise, as I said, it's got that little 2-liter, nothing special about it really. It does feel like it's a bit more powerful than the numbers suggest. 280 horsepower, 306 foot-pounds of torque. It feels like quite a bit more than that. More than adequate. It's not gonna like blow your socks off, but it's a good amount of power. Everybody would like a little bit more power. It's never a bad thing, but you really don't need it here. It's plenty. So it's a super torquey little engine. The power really hits you around like 3,500, 4,000 RPM, and it's just a surge of torque. One thing I will say is, and I think it has more to do with the calibration and probably the programming, if you're really not paying really close attention to how you're modulating the throttle, it can kind of, I guess, be surgy is the term I would use. When you're driving it at the limit, when you're driving it hard, all that kind of goes away. It's like the harder you drive the car, the smoother it gets. Drive-by-wire, there's always a little bit of lag. You have like pedal commanders and things like that can hopefully help with that, but I don't have one of those on this car, so I can't speak to that. The other thing I want to get into, speaking of drive-by-wire, the brakes. This car has IBS. Now, that doesn't stand for irritable bowel syndrome. In this case, it stands for intelligent braking system. It's not a good system. The hardware itself is fine. It's got Brembo brakes from the factory, regardless of the model you choose. The brakes work great when you step on the pedal hard, but it's really difficult to modulate because you don't have a physical connection between the brake pedal and the master cylinder and the rest of the braking system. It's all sending a signal through the computer. And I think the reason Alfa Romeo did that was to give you adjustability in your mode. So depending on what mode you're in, can't see. I can't see. We're good. Depending on what mode you're in, it's going to adjust the calibration of the brake pedal. So if you're in natural, which is where most people are going to drive it, it's going to be a little more civilized. It's going to be a little less sensitive. When you put it in dynamic, obviously that's sport mode. It sharpens up the brake pedal. But I don't like that, because if you're driving between modes and you're used to how the pedal should be modulated in one mode, and then you go to change your mode and then you step on the brake pedal in dynamic, and then you go bash your face off the steering wheel and knock your teeth out, it's not a good system. I don't think it's calibrated well. So as far as drivability, that's really the only thing I can knock on this car is the brakes. That could honestly be a deal breaker for some people. It's a pretty bad system, and that's honestly almost why I didn't buy the car. So this does have the ZF 8-speed, probably one of the best automatic transmissions, torque converted automatic transmissions out there. You're gonna find this in all sorts of applications, not exotic by any means. It's just a really good transmission all around, and it really depends on what car it's in and what manufacturer tuned it and calibrated it and things like that. In this, I feel like it suits the car really well. It shifts firm and really quickly, but it doesn't jolt you, and it's not harsh, but I don't think that affects how quickly it shifts. I had the same, or a form of the same transmission in my Charger Daytona. In sport mode, I feel like Dodge kind of calibrated that to be almost artificially hard shifting. This car also has really tiny, terrible visors, something else to note. But the way they had it calibrated in that car, in that Charger, in sport mode, when it shifted each gear, it would really jolt you, and it felt kind of artificial and fake. but I guess it kind of almost suited the car because that's kind of a big, brash American car, and this is a small, sporty Italian car. So the way they have it calibrated here, I think, is really good. It's not something you really notice, and in some applications, the ZF almost kind of shifts, or at least sounds like a dual clutch when it shifts. In this application, it doesn't necessarily do that, which again, like, some people love that, some people don't. The one thing I don't like about this transmission, and I don't know if it's just this car in particular, meaning this exact car or all Giulias do it, I'm not sure. The downshifts can be kind of inconsistent sometimes, especially if you're in manual mode. They can be a little bit slower than you'd like sometimes. The response is just about instant on the shifter here. For some reason, when you're shifting from 5th to 4th, downshifting, you get this really satisfying kind of like a throttle blip or rev match, if you want to call it that, in an automatic. It sounds really good, but it doesn't do it in any other gear. I'm not really sure why. There's, like I said, it's just a lack of consistency, and it probably comes down to tuning. So I'm not sure if like a remap would take care of that or what. But other than that, overall, the transmission suits the car really well. All right, so we talked about some of the important features of the interior, went over a little bit about the exterior, some of the things you can expect. Some of the things that I really like about the car, and there's plenty to like, and some of the things I don't really like. I don't want it to sound like I don't like the car. I know I kind of hit a lot of the cons and the negatives and the issues I have, but as an owner, I just want to kind of bring up the things that I've noticed over the course of the year, and about 10,000 miles, or I guess 9,200 miles, something like that. They're super fun to drive. We already knew that. I don't think anybody's going to argue with that. They're just, if you need a four-door car, reasonably priced, 40 to 50,000, and you value fun to drive, and you value sportiness and uniqueness. Obviously, it's a unique car. You don't see too many of them. You're going to get some attention with this car, and you might not necessarily get the same amount of attention if you have your run-of-the-mill BMW 3 Series, A4, C300, things like that. And depending on where you live, if you don't mind having to drive a little bit to get to the dealership for service, things like that, like you can't even do your own oil change on this car, and that's going to be how most modern cars are. You need an Alfa Romeo scan tool to clear the oil life indicator. Now, if you live in an area, depends on what part of the country you're in, you might have an Alfa Romeo dealership 10 minutes up the street. That makes it a little bit easier. Most modern cars, with all the electronics they have, you're probably going to have some issues. I haven't owned a new car that didn't have a couple of gremlins here and there right from the factory, regardless of the brand. If you're a car enthusiast, you're probably going to pick up on stuff that most people wouldn't pick up on. I mentioned I have a driveline vibration that I've noticed. I've had to the dealership a couple of times. Most people would probably not notice it. Your average driver is probably not going to notice that. But when you're a car guy, you notice every little thing. Focus ST didn't sound that good. Still doesn't sound that good. So if you're willing to put up with all those compromises, I definitely recommend the Alfa Romeo Giulia. The reason being is the fun to drive factor alone. It's such a fun car to drive. I look forward to driving it every single day. Should you buy this car? If you value fun to drive, if you value uniqueness, and you don't mind putting up with those compromises, absolutely buy it. Full send buy for sure. Go buy it.